in Egypt and Tunisia. But in the land ruled for so long by Muammar Gaddafi, the people appear to have elected a Congress dominated by a liberal party called the National Forces Alliance. It happened because of this man, Mahmoud Jibreil, the American-educated political scientist who was the transitional prime minister. He ran a campaign stressing economic reform, stability and inclusiveness. Jibreil's face may have been on all the campaign posters, but he was barred from seeking a seat himself because he once worked for Gaddafi's son, Saif. But Jibreil turned on Gaddafi early in the revolution and met with key international players, such as then French President Nicolas Sarkozy, to single-handedly put the rebels on the world map and get them international approval. So will he find a way to become Libya's next leader in a country that must essentially be rebuilt from scratch? I'll speak with Mahmoud Jibreil in just a moment about all of this, but first, a look at what's coming up later in the programme. Closing time for a deadly cocktail. Finding a new and unusual way to stop lethal injections. And Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. This daring Frenchman fought the Nazis with panache and exploding baguettes. We'll explain. We'll get to that in a bit, but first, Mahmoud Jibreil is Libya's game changer. And though full official results from the weekend elections are not yet in, initial results show that he has swept most of the major districts around the capital and around the country. So how did he get from a rebel outpost to perhaps the country's next leader? Mahmoud Jibreil, thank you so much for joining me from Tripoli.
Nice to be here.
Let me ask you, today the results of your election have been announced. How is it that you did so well? What accounts for Libya bucking the trend, if you like, whereby in other countries that have had elections, the Islamists have won, but not so in Libya?
Well, first of all, I think the Libyans did so well, you know. The level of awareness was a big surprise for everybody, and I think it's unprecedented case in the history of the human being that elections take place in the absence of the state. Usually the state is there and elections takes place under the state umbrella where you have an army, you have a police, and you have everything. So from that perspective, I think the only victorious party is the Libyan people.
So how did the Libyan people then have the opportunity to put, let's say, a more secular, more liberal group over the top? In other words, what was it politically, do you think, that you had that the Islamist Party did not?
The Libyan people have nothing to do with liberalism or secularism or ideology in general, you know. What matters to them is to restore stability, order, and start their own life and be compensated for 42 years of deprivation of every sort of development. This is what matters to them. I think our program, which we presented to the Libyan people, to a large degree, was compatible with those needs.
You just mentioned something that, of course, everybody is looking at. You talked about the absence of the state. Not just now in this transitional period, but throughout the Gaddafi regime, we see a systematic destruction of the state, of civic systems there, civil society. Is that a challenge or is that an opportunity as you look ahead?
I think it can be looked at both ways. It's a challenge in the sense that there is no sense of order, of discipline in the minds of people. And this takes time, you know, to install and restore this sense of discipline and obedience to the law. But from the other side, I think it's an opportunity that all parties, all political forces can have a new start where all of them can participate and take part in re-establishing the state. So the legitimacy issue can be granted.
So how do you deal with what we've been seeing throughout the transition period, and especially around the elections? There was a lot of factionalism, a lot of violence. We know that there is tribal strife, and we know that there are militias who are in control of various areas. How do you bring all of them under a national umbrella going forward? How do you create a national army, for instance, out of these disparate militias?
Well, in the past, there was no legitimacy, you know. The legitimacy that we had during the TNC period was some sort of consensual legitimacy. The legitimacy that we've been granted as Libyans now, as political forces now, is a 100% accurate legitimacy derived from the polls, you know. In that sense, any government in office can enforce whatever programs that can maintain order and can restore the state and its apparatus back to our life.
Many talk about you as the next eventual leader of Libya. I know you've talked about it in the past, but is that something that you look forward to? Will you run for the highest office in the land?
I don't think the question has to do anything with posts, whether a president or a leader or the prime minister. I think the question in my mind is a question of role. If there isn't a role that I can play, what matters to me is the effectiveness of that role. If I can contribute to the national interests of my country, I will not hesitate. But if there is a role that I cannot do anything from within that role, then I will not take part in it.
So you're leaving the door open to seeking further high office?
Well, it depends, you know. Sometimes I'm just a consultant. I can provide consultancy to the next government, to the next president, and that role can be more effective than the post itself, you know. So it depends what role I can play, you know, where I can find myself.
So what is the biggest challenge now that this round of elections has taken place?
I think the biggest challenge right now is to convince our potential partner, especially the Islamist forces, with the fact that now it's time that we sit around one table and talk about one destiny that's the interest of the Libyan people. Consensus is the name of the game. It has nothing to do with who prevails in those elections and who does not prevail.
Well, again, it gets back to where you are on the Islamic spectrum, so to speak. Are you secular? Are you liberal? Are you Islamic enough? You know that the political wing of the Libyan Muslim Brotherhood has said that you just aren't. What role, in your mind, should Islam play in the new Libya?
I am a true Muslim, you know, but I have nothing to do with ideology, whether it's secularism, liberalism, political Islam. I believe in knowledge that builds societies. I am a part and member of the World Future Society since 1987. My obsession and my love is futurology. I believe that planning, knowledge, science is what builds societies. I think the cause of the Libyan people is development first. We have to take care of our education system, which has to be rebuilt again. Our health services is totally a mess. We need to rebuild it again. Housing, unemployment. We have a vast amount of wealth. The question of how to manage that vast amount of wealth to create an alternative economy to this rentier economy, to the oil. I think these are the real challenges that can sustain life on this earth.
And are you optimistic about that? Again, in the framework of what Libya has been, basically the fiefdom of one man, one family, a lot of corruption, a lot of unemployment that you have to deal with right now. And yet, yes, you're a very, very rich country with a very small population. Are you optimistic that you can get all these challenges under control and that Libya can be developed economically?
With what I have seen on the 7th of July, yes, I am very much optimistic. I think on the 7th of July, the Libyan people have managed to prove one thing, that they are the real decision maker, that the destiny of this country is not in the hands of any individual, of any political force or political party. It's only in their hands, you know. And this is very comforting for me, you know.
I think it was a huge surprise that the elections went off as well as they did, given all the violence and the chaos, actually, leading up to the elections. Can I ask you something? You were fundamentally vital to get the Libyan opposition, the rebels, if you like, recognized by the West, get them international approval. When you look across at Syria, what do you think has to happen there? Why haven't they been able to get that same kind of recognition and approval? They're struggling for the same things that you all struggled for.
Well, I have talked to many members of the Syrian National Council, and I always tell them that the name of the game is unity. You have to be united. I think as long as they are not united, I think there is a problem there. When they are united, they can have effectiveness, and when they have effectiveness, they can make the whole world listen to them, you know. But as long as there are divisions among them, I think the degree of effectiveness is still very much very low.
And what chances do you give, or how do you see the future there? Do you think the forces of opposition will win, or do you think the state will remain in power?
Oh, yeah, they will win, but too much sacrifices, you know. I've been in a regime in the world, in my opinion, the moment they spill just one drop of blood of their own citizens, they have lost legitimacy for good, period. It's just a question of time. The more united you are, the shorter the time it's going to take. The more divisions there, the longer time it's going to take.
And finally, about Saif al-Islam, Muammar Gaddafi's eldest son, who brought you in to do some economic reform, but who now is going to face justice. As you know, the international courts would like to put him on trial. Can you see that ever happening, or do you insist that it happens inside Libya? And do you think he'll get a fair trial?
Well, legally speaking, I think Libyan law has supremacy over international law. 2, we are not members to the ICC. 3, I think it's the natural right of the Libyan people to have whomever committed the crimes against them to be tried in Libyan soil, you know.
Mahmoud Jibbril, thank you so much.
But having said that, I think that the ICC can have international observers attending this court, just to make sure that it's fair and it's carried out according to international standards.
An important distinction. Mahmoud Jibbril, thank you so much for joining me from Tripoli.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
The birth of any nation, especially one like Libya that's known only dictatorship for the past half-century, won't come without trial and error. But even a long-established democracy like the United States has yet to overcome its prejudices and its divisive politics, such as the death penalty. In a moment, a look at how capital punishment is being challenged one deadly drop at a time. But first, take a look at this picture. That's a newspaper stand in Tripoli, overflowing with choices. A year ago, when Gaddafi was in power, there were only 6 newspapers in Libya, all of them government-controlled. How things have changed. We'll be right back.
Along the Silk Road, in association with Mubadala,